My name is Chris Lindsey. I am an application security evangelist over at mend.io. My focus is really just education. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I respond. I talk about application security. I do a lot of things. I run a podcast called Secrets of AppSec Champions, and I do private communities and other things. The background that kind of goes into this, and some people that have already seen me or heard me, I have 35 years of development experience. When you start looking at some of the applications out there, 30 of them were in healthcare. The last one I was in charge of was a medication prescribing system. So security was paramount, and if you screw up, somebody dies. So no stress, no pressure there. Then I ran a security program, built it from the ground up for over 3 years for a very large enterprise, and was very successful. So I took that and got burnt out. A lot of people get burnt out in security, and I went to one of my vendors, Mend, and that's what brings me here to today. All right, as we go, I like to do a lot of interactivity. This is the last one of the day, so show of hands who's still awake. How many people have, they're over flooded with a lot of knowledge from today, so their brain is just kind of oozing out of their ears, kind of. So it's been a long day. So I do a lot of my talks are really developer focused, security focused, and kind of in between. So show of hands, how many of you guys are developers? A few. Security guys? The other half, and then a couple enthusiasts, because, yep, all right. Well, let's get rolling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the promise of AI. I'm going to talk about maximizing developer effectiveness, expediting product delivery. I've got a couple of other things I've kind of thrown in there that's not on here, wrap up and QA. As we go through, let's just do questions. That's okay. I always love starting with quotes. So if you choose to not decide, you still have made a choice. Neil Peart, what group is he with?
Rush.
Rush. Yes, love that song. All right, well, let's get rolling. I love this. I ran across it. I talked to Patrick, who actually posted about it. Phone check. This is actually from September of this year. It has a born-on fresh date of last month. How ready are you? What do we do, right? So when you look at the time to reported exploitation, first day 16.7, first month 29.5, first year 53. So really the first month is super critical, but definitely the first year because you hit that 50%. This next one, you have the ability to affect your own world. I loved this when I came across it because when you start looking at the open source software, you start looking at server software, desktop, CMS, and the different areas, while you can't affect everything in your day-to-day job, there's a lot of this that you can actually affect. And so just think about this, because you may not have the ability to directly modify it, but you still have the ability to put mitigation stuff in front of it. And when you start thinking about from an attack model and the different things you can do, think about all the fun things you can do with red teaming AI. So it gives you a lot of stuff. All right, so let's start with the promise of AI-powered AppSec. So you're evaluating AppSec to the center of the AI revolution. So what does this actually mean? Well, when you start looking at what AI has done in different areas, image creation and even doing a really cool AI tool like Whisper, where you can take a video that has audio and everything and convert it over, you start looking at the fact that AppSec is actually positioned really well to benefit from this. And I'm going to be talking about from developers, from the security side, from all over the benefits that it can bring. And it's really amazing because when you start looking at what AI can do, it can bring meaning to the data and the stuff you're looking at that's not apparent to the human eye. It can build correlations you never thought were there. And so when you start feeding it information and start working with it, it's really amazing the value that it's going to bring. Unprecedented visibility in the shadow AI. How many people, show of hands, know what shadow AI is? Okay. Interesting study. I won't use the name, but a very, very, very large company we did a proof of concept with. And what we did was we came out and we asked them, what percentage do you think of your company, your developers, your guys, are running shadow AI? 20%. We actually found 80%. And when you start looking at all the bits and pieces that tie into this, it's amazing because it's not just something very simple like, oh, I'm using an LLM, or no, you start seeing that AI is embedded into browser extensions. It's embedded into the day-to-day tools that you don't even realize have actually been, infused with AI. And so, and the crazy part about all this, at the end of the day, really, we've come a long way with AI, but AI realistically became more and more mainstream back in February of this year. When you look at the fact that it wasn't, before February, some people were talking about AI, but when you look at where we are today, these weren't conversations we had back in February. So it's gone a long way. All right, red teaming. I will tell you, I've had tons of fun playing with red teaming and AI. And some of the things that are out there, I'll hit upon some of those, I'll talk about it. But guardrails. So Gemini, who knows Gemini? Show of hands. Okay, you guys know Gemini. I posted about this dark Gemini. How many of you guys know what dark Gemini is? One. Imagine taking Gemini and absolutely removing all guardrails from it. To be able to go in there and say, hey, if I go into a regular AI model, give me the source code to bypass a web application firewall. Sorry, that's unethical. But what if I had a model that I can go in and say, hey, go create a C# application that bypasses a web application firewall? Sure, here's the code. Pure and simple. No questions asked. You can ask it anything, and it'll give you everything. There's absolutely no restrictions. You can get that for $35 a month on the dark web, just so you know. It's out there, and I have met people who have used it, and I played with it a little bit, and it's scary. So when you start looking at what it can do, and as a company, you're fighting this, and you don't realize it. All right, so talk about how can we secure the AI stuff that we're using. We'll talk about red teaming capabilities on the next slide, talking about proactively identifying vulnerabilities and simulating attacks, as well as doing AI guardrails validation and prompt injection, because we all know prompt injection is, I'll hit it later. Okay, so red teaming. Proactive risk and analysis and mitigation. So when you start looking at what you can do, there's a lot of free and open source options available. And if you go to Dark Gemini and ask it, it'll tell you all of them, including serial numbers, codes, and everything else that you would want. But we're not going to go there because we don't do that kind of stuff. But anyway, it gives you the ability to, there's just a lot of good open source options and things that you can Google. You can even go to OpenAI, ask it, and it gives you a good list of options. And I've played with some of them. Automatic and adaptive attacks on your applications to identify. This was really cool. I'm going to go ahead and talk about it. I know it's down there in DAST, but when you start supercharging your DAST with it, what happens on a DAST scan? It just goes top to bottom, right? Okay, I'm going to do parameter fuzzing. All right, here's all of it. Next, 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 until it gets to the end. Then it comes up with the next attack and next thing it's going to do. But imagine going through and it stops and it says, hey, I think I found something. Show of hands, Burp Suite. How many of you guys know Burp Suite? I would imagine most of you guys. You do a simple pass-through on Burp Suite. You've got penetration testers on your team, or that might be you. And you find that little nugget, and that little nugget says, hey, I think I might have found something. But imagine AI at that point going, I'm going to go down that rabbit hole and see what I can find. And as a matter of fact, actually, I'm going to spin off more threads so that I can keep doing my thing and continue my attack. And so this is what AI is headed towards. You can validate AI model guardrails to ensure. So the cool part is you can use AI to test AI, and from the red teaming, you can look at and play with some of the tools out there and go against your own stuff. How can I bypass this? What can I do to get around it? What can I do to break into my own systems? If you're not doing it, get it on your list because you need to. Early threat detection. So when you start looking at, again, your own applications, go out and do your own red teaming against it. Don't just do the basic stuff like the Burp Suite. They now actually you can, because AI, Burp Suite now has a plugin for AI that plugs into it, and you can supercharge your Burp Suite with AI for the paid version. So there's some really cool things that you can do there. So early threat detection, so you can find things in your dev environment. And I have some really cool stuff that I'm gonna hit here on a future slide. And then you can focus on your identified vulnerabilities. So when you do find something, it's that mentality of, if I find something that's bad enough, I'm gonna get it on the list because I'm not gonna release it. But if I don't find it, or if it's not bad enough, I can deal with it later. It goes back to I'm only gonna modify what's really in the scope of the work that I'm doing. And I had this conversation with somebody the other day where we were talking about, why aren't my developers doing my stuff? And essentially, I was explaining to him from a developer mentality is, if I'm not touching code that's vulnerable, why would I stop and go create more potential bugs or issues for me down the line? They're not gonna do it. You gotta find a way to incentivize it and do it. We'll get there later. So anyway, next generation tools, right? So start thinking about what SaaS does. I know that I'm gonna go ahead and call you out, Eton. You're doing amazing stuff in this realm. There's a lot of applications out there that will actually find SaaS findings and then actually tell you or give you code snippets to fix it. And so from a developer standpoint, developers are now starting to get answers to the questions that they didn't have answers for. They didn't know I have this finding, but now they do know that they have a finding, and here's the code that you can look at to use to fix it. Again, this is the same thing that we used to do in the old days. Stack Overflow, you guys know Stack Overflow, you know Google. That's what we did. We would, back before AI, that's what we did. And so we would find the answers and it would take time, but now you just go in, you ask AI, hey, what's this? Here's the answer. DAST, we talked about it. SCA, start thinking about what SCA can do. Burp Suite has a plugin. That plugin says, you're using this dependency, this version, and here's the vulnerabilities associated to it. Now imagine saying, hey, I know the vulnerabilities associated to it. Let me go attack those specific vulnerabilities head on instead of just sitting there and guessing. So you're gonna really turbocharge those capabilities. And these are three of the many that are out there. And today I've heard and I've learned a lot about more of the stuff that's happening within our ecosystem. And it's exciting and it's scary. The continuous evolution and collaboration. So as threats evolve, so does detection. All right, why is this? Well, because as threats evolve, we're writing tools, we're writing code to fix them, to identify them, to fix them. And the reality is you guys know, LLMs aren't self-learning. They're not growing beyond the capabilities of what they're feeding, or of what they have. So they only can regurgitate what they know. And so as the threats evolve, people are putting stuff in, they're getting learned, they're educating. So you may have a company that comes across something, feeds into the AI, you get that benefit. So they're constantly evolving and always on approach. So you leave work 5, 6 o'clock at night, your AI stuff is still working the rest of the night for you until you get back and during the day. Depending on how you implement it, again, I'm gonna be talking about this here pretty quick, just amazing things. Prioritization, I'm gonna share with you, I know that Notepad or Notebook LM got a bad rap because you can feed it some information and tell it to create a podcast for you, and it does. And it's crazy because it will actually create conversation on that topic back and forth and even interrupt itself. But what's really cool about it is the fact that you can feed it a lot of information from multiple sources and ask it questions and it will give you answers. And you can feed it thread information and say, how would you prioritize this? And it gives you some actual information. It's crazy, it's weird, but it's out there. And really, when you start thinking about it, think about an ASPM system that has AI. You're feeding it all that information. Its focus is actually bringing it together and giving you a prioritization standpoint, and now you actually have that. And so it's just amazing when you really consider the value and the things it's going to bring for the future. Taking into account multiple data points. So when you run an ASPM system, the thing that the right way to do it is think about the tooling that you have. what you're already using and you just feed into it. Having those data feeds gives you that information to be able to build a better prioritization standpoint. You can say, hey, I have this problem, but it's actually lower than I thought because, well, command execution, command injection. If it's on a command line, does it really matter as much as if it were running on a web server backend? Day and night. Those decisions can be made through an ASPM, especially AI-powered ASPM. All right, teaching and training. GPT tools. Lots of fun here. So think about this. If you have an SSRF or any kind of vulnerability or any kind of thing that pops up, if you open up OpenAI, ChatGPT, whatever, and say, what is this? What is a SQL injection? Can you give me an example of a SQL injection in my current language? In Java, in C#, in whatever language. It will give it to you. And then you can ask it, can you give me an example of how to solve it? And it will. And so the nice part about this is, as security folks, you now have the ability to say, let me teach you how to fish and find some of the answers without, Bonnie.
How do you justify the answer that your LLM gives you? Tell me your justification.
So here's the thing with it. I'm going to hear a lot of grunting and things when I say, today, AI is wrong 52% of the time. I talked about that because what's happening is, as you guys know how LLMs work, it's generative and it just keeps going down the line, and it gets to a point where if it just kind of runs out of itself, it may start hallucinating, creating kind of random things. You don't know. But the reality is as a developer, as a security folk, you'll be able to tell this is gibberish or this is actual actionable type data. Or I don't know. And then you can ask it again, or another model, and then do 3 models and take the best 2 of the 3. But that capability is out there. The vulnerability types and remediation options, you can just ask it and it just gives it to you. And that's the really kind of nice part about some of the GPT tools out here is you can just start now bringing this up. And your company, don't paste code in there. Don't just take your source code and paste it in there, especially if you're just opening it up as guest, because all the stuff you're doing gets saved, as you guys know. And if you are working with, and talking about the hallucination, if you are working with models locally, depending on the quantification levels and some of the details behind it, you're going to find that it's easier to hallucinate on those kind of models than it is on the open like Claude or OpenAI. And I played with a lot of the models on Hugging Face, playing with LM Studio, and I run across frequently hallucinations there that you wouldn't normally get on OpenAI. So the model and tools all play into it. And you can build examples for vulnerability types and remediation advice. So if you have a development group that just simply doesn't know, you can show them how to do ChatGPT, or you can actually spend 30 seconds, take a junior developer or a junior guy on the security team and have them work on it, because now it doesn't take that senior knowledge, because the senior guy can now be focused on more senior type stuff for the team. All right, developers are using AI, driving AI usage and adoption. So the reality is this is happening without security teams knowing it. And this is that shadow AI that we were talking about. So the problem is, man, I found this really cool open source project. I grabbed it, I'm running it, it's working great. But do you know where it's going? Is it actually going out to the internet? Is it hitting an AI model? And some of them actually are, and you just don't realize it. And so the other thing too is they're also grabbing browser plugins. So when you start looking at the different things that are AI powered, again, it's not just, oh, look, I manually implemented this model. Now it's more of, it's actually inherently in a lot of things, and you didn't realize it. Again, that 80% was a shock. So within the tools that they're using without realizing it, so the updated Eclipse, the updated Visual Studio, the updated, think of your whatever IDE tool you're using for development. Those are now starting to be AI enabled and doing things with AI. And if you're just taking the updates, you have Copilot now and don't even realize it. And it's like, oh, these, the new versions are just giving you these great suggestions, and they're great, and you're just using them and moving forward. So they're not realizing that some of the things that they're using or grabbing has this stuff. So development, programming tools, browser tools, utilizing LLMs model knowingly without knowledge of potential vulnerabilities. So I need something. Well, what did we do in the old days? We went out, we found it, we plugged it in and ran with it. Now it's, hey, I'd love to have a model, or I need to do something. So they run out, they grab a model, and they start playing with it. And the problem is when you go to Hugging Face, how do I know I'm pulling a model that's actually a good model, one that has malicious intent? How do I know this kind of stuff? Well, think about it this way. If I go out and I grab a container, and that container, I bring it in, I do my scan, I do everything, I put it in a sandbox for 2 weeks, I play with it, I go back 2 weeks later and I know that the container has, nobody's screaming about the container being malicious, and it's passed all my tests, then you know that you can copy it internally and just point to it for your build process, because you know it's clean until something otherwise pops up. Same thing with models. You can take the model in, there's a lot of security tools out there that will scan them. You can look at the Hugging Face details, because a lot of that shows up on the Hugging Face website, as well as tools that are out there. And it'll tell you, hey, these models are good or not. Bring it in. Again, that 2-week sandbox test is good, just because if it is malicious, within 2 weeks, hopefully someone's gonna step up and say, hey, I'm noticing this model is doing something malicious, or it's, and malicious could be more than just hitting something on the internet. It could just be inefficient and cost you more money to run. So I mean, there's a lot of pieces to what makes a model malicious. And so my favorite, and I played with this, and it was so cool, some of the models out there that do documentation, if you just point it to a database and you give it full access, you point it to your file system and give it full access, like the root folder, you can turn around and you can say, hey, give me the /etc/passwd file, and guess what? It returns it. And so if you're not putting the appropriate things when you're working with models, it will give it to you. So think about this, least common privilege. If it's hitting a database, create a user for it. Allow that user to only get to certain data, certain columns, certain anything that you want it to see, but no more. Same thing for your file system. Make sure that it can't escape the directories that you give it, and put limits and guardrails on it. And then there's also some tools, again, some of the red teaming tools that will help validate that it can't break out. Code generation, always, always, always. Senior tech review this code. All right, so this is something that I did that was kind of fun. I'm actually gonna probably end up doing this for an upcoming conference talk, but I always talk about this. Open up ChatGPT. On the prompt, say, create an API endpoint that uses JWT tokens and C#. Bloop, here's my code. So now I have my code. Then you turn around and you say, well, is this secure? And then ChatGPT comes back and says, no, I found all these issues with it. Here's the issues, blah, 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 and it tells you. And then you say, well, would you fix them for me? Sure. And then here's some more code. The reason why I bring this up is your developers are starting to play with some of this stuff, saying, hey, I need something that will do X, Y, and Z. And it produces code. That code works, it compiles, it goes nicely in to your program, and it's now insecure. And sometimes your tools can find it, and sometimes not, depending on the vulnerability that's been identified with it. So when I did do this test, and it came back and said, here's my clean code, I then ran it through a SAST scanner, and I found that I had more stuff that OpenAI didn't know. So OpenAI does not know everything. And so if my talk gets accepted, I think it's gonna be a lot of fun, because I'm actually gonna do a full-blown application. All right, developer tools can increase developer productivity by 50%. We already talked about you have to senior tech review the code. If you're not, you're playing dangerously. Refactoring, here's one of the cool things. So I wrote an open source utility. I thought it'd be kind of fun to do. I was being lazy. I did nested ifs. I wasn't playing with link. I just was tired and I didn't want to do it. And my first draft was if this, if this, if this, bloop. Then I turned around and I took that code snippet, put it in the ChatGPT and said, create a link query, and it did a great job. I know what link looks like, so I knew that the output and everything that was created was proper and what I wanted, so I plugged it in and ran with it. So when you start looking at your nested ifs or converting the code to be a little bit smarter, or you could say, hey, here's a code snippet, it's in Java, can you put this into C# or another language for me? It can. Be careful when you're sending that stuff in, because a lot of models will train on that, and so you're giving away some information. If I remember correctly, I think it was the PlayStation 5 guys, there was a developer that had uploaded all the source code to one of the, I think it was an OpenAI model, and said, hey, would you optimize this for me? And it gave optimized code back. And then when Sony found out, they were not happy. And so there was a lot of lawyer back and forth. Okay, automated code-based tools to check real-time potential. So one of the things that's nice is when you start looking at some of the IDEs out there, they give you helpful hints. One of the scariest things for me, being an old developer, starting to play with Visual Studio, is I start typing a line, and most of the time its suggestions are right on. And I do the first line, and then I hit tab, and it goes, well, you're probably going to check for that string value that you put in there, so then it does a check for if it's null or void or missing or whatever automatically, which is typically what you would do for validation. So it started doing it for me, and it was just like, this is amazing. So it can really increase the speed, but again, be cautious of the security vulnerabilities. Predictive error detection, so some of the tools can spot potential code that might be prone to errors. So if you ask it, hey, this is something that's out there, do you see anything that might be wrong with it? It will actually tell you, well, it's possible that you could actually have somebody do a denial of service against your database. That's amazing. Most people don't think about that. That's some of the things that it can do. Or it may come back and say, well, this could be potentially, this could come in and possibly cause problems. So that's out there. Testing automation, the thing that's cool is you can say, create my unit tests for me, or automation for QA. The automation for QA is huge, because when I was, back in my day, when I was doing that medication prescribing system, we created unit tests, and I think we created probably close to 500,000 unit tests in there, because we had to be absolutely spot on. Our QA group did a full regression test, and they built all this manually, and it took months to get it done, to get it right. And the runtime was about a day and a half, 2 days. So for every time we did everything, it was a minimum of 2 days through QA. When you start looking at the automation and the testing, you can start taking that and doing threading and other things to actually speed that up and still get simple answers. You still want to do some of the complex stuff yourself, but it can really, instead of those months, you can shape that down to probably at least a week or 2. All right, and then you can implement a lot of this as early as the integration branch. So I think it's on the next slide. Let me check real quick, because this is a cool project. Nope. I'll go ahead and talk about it here, but we'll see it here again in a couple slides. Automation test for QA. So when you've committed your code on the feature branch, you move it up to your integration branch. The integration branch is all about making sure that everybody's, that committed to that didn't break each other. At that point, you could actually kick off automation QA testing there without actually taking all the effort from the QA team. So now you can move QA left and actually get results much quicker and know, did we create anything beyond just the unit tests and the automation tests that we have? And so that's pretty cool. 99 bugs of the code, they fixed it, created 104. All right, so some tools can analyze what the code has been doing and explain it. One of the neat things is you can take some code, drop it in ChatGPT and ask it, what is this doing? And it'll actually tell you. And you can say, give it to me like I'm a 5th grader. And it'll tell you and walk you through what it's doing. So what's neat is if you have a junior developer and you want to help them get up to speed quicker, you can show this to them and give them that benefit. All right, learn new technologies. So one of the neat things is I haven't written a Go program before, and I wanted to write something in Go. So then I asked it, hey, I want a basic program in Go that does X, Y, and Z. And it gave me the source code. And then I said, I want to be able to do this. And it gave me the source code. And I just kept asking little bits. I want to do this. I want a PDF reader. I want this. I want this. I want this. And it just kept giving it to me. And then like a chef in the kitchen, I mixed it all together and I had a Go program. And I did it in a matter of days versus weeks. So when you start thinking about what you can do there, it's amazing. And again, you can ask it, hey, what does this function do? And it gives it to you. You can do automatic AI code review. Surely that thing's got to be coming up here soon that I think is mind-blowing. AI code review, so now you have that automated code, you've committed it, you've got your code review. Senior tech review, you can automate some of that. But please have a human in the process that actually looks at it, because if you don't have a human in the process, who knows what's actually making it forward? And it could be hallucinating and say, yeah, we're good, and it's not. Supply chain, you start looking at your AI tools. So we were talking earlier about going down the stack. I have an open source tool that has an open source tool that has an open source and so on. Now you can actually say, go create unit tests that go test all the way down to this degree for me, and it will do it. It's amazing. Automated QA, again, when you commit, you have some, QA has their own tools now that are AI powered. And it's just crazy when you start looking at what they can do. Again, it goes back to instead of spending months and months and months building the QA test plan and the QA actual automated test, it can do it for you. It can even identify and detect code changes and hone in on those changes. So think about if you have a developer that goes out and creates a big application, it's got 1 million lines of code, but they go in and they just fix one bug, one hotfix, one little piece. AI can detect specifically what's been addressed, modified, create the tests, do the test for that, and then call it a day, and block the release if it fails. And that blocking a release could say, hey, it may pass, but now I found new security vulnerabilities that were not identified, but they're now identified. We're going to block it so that a human can look at it and address it. Documentation. How many of you guys, show of hands, have used AI for documentation purposes? Isn't it amazing? It's outstanding. The fact that you can pass in an API and it creates all the information for you. You can say, create a developer version, create an end user version. I mean, it's just crazy the benefits and the values that it brings. Automated deployment, here we are. So I was talking last night and I shared this. Imagine using AI to go out on your build pipeline and spin up an entire environment that looks like production, Kubernetes and all. It builds on a container, it pushes there, then it actually kicks off your tests against it. You can run your SAST and your DAST and automated pen testing tools and all this right there. When it's done, spin it down and return the results in a report. This can happen all completely on the side without slowing down your development or anything. And what does this all do? It leads to improved quality assurance, better decision making, optimization, and predictive. So, I mean, there's so many cool things that we're headed to. All right, one thing I do want to do real quick is I'm going to take a picture because my boss is like, hey, I want to see the room. So I will do this as I'm talking. I'll grab this. So one of the things that nobody talks about is QA. How often have you heard or seen on LinkedIn a security guy talking about QA? Show of hands. All right, some, not tons. Okay, so the reality is, what's the relationship between a developer and QA? We always talk about the relationship between security and QA, and we know that it is a love fest. I love you, you love me, we're happy, but you're not going to release. No, the reality is QA and developers have a harsh relationship. A lot of the QA teams are really good, they find a lot of things, and they step on the pride of developers every day. And they shed developer tears all the time. But the reality is QA is there to make sure that things are right and things are good. And the reality is QA needs to be part of the security process. Again, show of hands, because I know we're late in the day. How many people are actually bringing in QA to your release, your security process? Not many hands. Let me share what I did. For QA, they had a copy of the last security scan for the last release. When they get a new release, they get all the security vulnerabilities that were identified. They're not allowed to release any new security vulnerabilities. Now, if I had 10 criticals and they fix a critical but create a critical, it's still blocked. They fixed it, but they introduced one. The one they introduced, they still have to fix. That critical could be worse than it was before, it might be better, but the reality is they introduced something. If you take that approach, you will slowly move your vulnerability counts down. And what I did that worked very, very well is it's a matter of when you look at the relationship between the number of criticals and highs to the lines of code. When you have that ratio, when I first started, I was 20% or better. I got it down to 4. And when we acquired new companies, which we were acquiring 3 to 4 a quarter, it bumped it up a little bit, but we had that thing resolved really quick. QA needs to be part of this, and when you start working with QA, work with them on AI and the benefits that it can bring, because it's really huge. Did you have a question? Okay. So, and then security teams need to understand. So that whole developer and security relationship still exists for our developer, and security still exists for QA. So don't forget, QA makes them cry too. All right, wrapping up. I'm actually doing pretty good on time. AI is still evolving, so think about it. We February, where we were, where we are today. Where are we going to be in a year from now? 5 years from now? Here's one of the cool things. I was sitting at, and this was at Black Hat, Google DeepMind's, NVIDIA, and Microsoft were talking on a panel, and the comment came up about hallucinations and where we are today. If you ask GPT how many R's in strawberry, most of the time it's wrong. The vast majority, actually. What they've done is they've created a new engine that will hit a certain point and say, I know we're good to here, but the next levels, I'm not sure. And it starts branching off as a tree. And as it branches off as a tree, now it gets to the end, so it spins all these up and it says which one's right, and then it comes back. And they said within a 90 to 95% success rate. So that 52% goes away of false positives, and now it becomes more like 5. Huge improvements. And so there's just lots of things going on. And so, if you're putting your head in the sand on AI, you need to pull it out because it's here to stay. It's not going away. And look at all the different things. It's improving our velocity, but we have to be cautious. Our security posture, you can now bring in some junior developers, junior security guys to really help, in that field. And if you don't have a developer on your security team and you have tons of vulnerabilities, you're gonna be in trouble. Because if you hand all of those off to the development team, they're gonna hate you and they will turn off any communication. And I've spoken with 5 different companies in this last month who are struggling, and I had one-on-one calls with them on Zoom. And that has been the story. My first question is what is your relationship and how good is it? And it always starts off as terrible. And then I say, do you have a developer? And the developer answer is no. And I say, do you share all the results? And the answer is yes. And so that is your common problem early on. That human factor needs to be there. And I'll share this one thing and then wrap up. If you have that, one of the things I did that was weird. People find it weird, but it worked really well. I would call the software architects from time to time and say hello. Blows their minds. So then they would say, well, Chris, are you calling to say hi or are you calling for a problem? I'm just calling for hi. Great. Hey, I'm calling you. Is this for a problem or for hello? I have a problem. We solved it. We always did. When you have that relationship, they are willing to go the extra mile for you. But when you don't have that relationship, it's that love fest like you have with QA. Automated testing and remediation, we're doing amazing things. So again, when a new developer asks for documentation, I am the documentation. Any questions? I went over a lot very fast.
Just a quick question, and somewhat related to what you're talking about, the dev team and the QA and the security team.
Yeah.
What In terms of the relationship between dev, QA, and security, sounds like QA, they're doing testing, they're finding problems, and that's what
Right.
the security team does. So why aren't the security teams just advisors to the QA team? So the QA team is handling all the testing, including security testing, and then the security people are just saying, hey, build this test case, and then QA runs it. Why is there that separation, especially in the modern day?
You know, that is a very good question. And to be honest with you, I am in full agreement on that. Because when you start looking at the hierarchy, QA has the ability to block a release. How often for security guys can you go, or that you even know that a release is going out the door? I mean, because they're releasing stuff all the time and you have no idea. When I ran my program, we had 700 developers, over 15,000 projects, and any given day we were releasing. We were scanning 2.9 billion lines of code per month. We did that because we scanned every commit. And people will say, well, that's a waste of resources and effort. Well, here's the thing. QA at any given time can say with their tool, because I hooked it up for them, what's the security posture of this release? And it would just pop right up. It was already there. I didn't have to do that takes 9 hours to run. You're going to have to hold off on your release for 9 hours. I had all the information. It was already done. It was already at the fingertips. And the answers were always ready to go. Any other questions? Cool. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you very much.